It was a Wednesday evening, just another workday, slipping into routine, or so I thought. Megan had made her usual brisk entrance, setting her bag down by the door and announcing, "I'll start dinner soon," her voice muffled as she toed off her heels. It was a small gesture, but enough to snap me from my thoughts as I finished shutting down my laptop in the study. In 12 years, you come to know every tone and glance. This was her, I'm going to say something serious tone. She was already in the kitchen by the time I joined her, busying herself with chopping vegetables with a bit too much focus. The silence felt heavier than usual. Megan was a tall, confident woman, with sharp green eyes that could either soften with kindness or harden with the glint of an idea she couldn't let go. And today, there was something a little too composed in her stance, like she'd rehearsed a conversation in her mind all the way home. I didn't know it yet, but she was about to crack open something I could never have imagined. We went through the usual motions of small talk, until she set the knife down, wiped her hands on the dish towel, and took a breath. "Alex," she started, eyes fixed on the countertop, then flicking up to meet mine. "I've been thinking about us, about our marriage." She glanced away as if looking for the right words to line up like ingredients for a recipe she was trying out for the first time. My heart thudded. In a flash, I saw my entire life stretching out, routine after routine, day after day, but her tone was sharp enough to slice through any hope that this would just be a simple discussion. "Okay," I said slowly. "What's on your mind?" She took a sip of water, steadying herself, and said it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I think we should consider an open marriage." For a long, surreal second, I just stared at her. Megan, the woman I had built my life around, shared all these years, meals, bills, plans, and, until recently, the intimacy of knowing someone better than anyone else was sitting in front of me, suggesting that. I felt my entire chest go cold, my stomach lurch. An open marriage? I repeated, more to buy myself time than because I didn't understand. I understood her words, all right. It was the meaning behind them that eluded me, the why, the how. How did this conversation fit in with the life we'd spent years weaving together? "Yes," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I mean, it could be what we need right now. Things have, gotten stale." She glanced away again. "And it's not like I'm talking about cheating, Alex. It's about openness, about trust. We'd be completely honest with each other, everything out in the open. No lies, no secrets." Her tone was too assured, almost rehearsed. Like she discussed this with someone else, no more than that. Someone had planted this idea, watered it, watched it grow. I knew immediately who it was. Zoe, Megan's friend, the divorcee who seemed to spend half her days posting about freedom and independence like it was a religion. "And you think this is reasonable?" I asked, struggling to keep my tone level, hiding the well of anger and disbelief rising in my chest. "I mean, how long have you been thinking about this?" Megan chewed her lip, a familiar gesture that usually meant she was trying to say something tactfully. "A while," she admitted, then softened her tone as if I was the one who needed to be persuaded gently. "Alex, I think it could work. Look, Zoe and I talked about it a little, and I felt my face tense." "Zoe." She stopped, her cheeks tinged with red, looking as though she'd said more than she intended. But it was too late. The damage was done. "Yes, Zoe," she said, trying to regain her composure. She's been through a lot herself, and she sees things differently, that's all. She thinks people get stuck in these conventional ideas of marriage. And look, it's not about her. This is about us, Alex. About finding a way to bring us closer. The word stung. Zoe saw things differently, all right. Zoe saw marriages as cages, something to be escaped from. I could almost hear her smug voice in Megan's head, whispering, nudging her toward this liberating revelation. Just like that, I muttered, half to myself, trying to make sense of it. "And what does this open marriage look like exactly?" She straightened up, almost relieved that I was asking questions, as if it meant I was considering it. "Well, we'd set boundaries. We'd both know what was happening, be completely honest. There'd be no sneaking around, no secrecy. It'd be a way for us to explore, to rediscover what we want." "What we want?" I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I felt my jaw clench, heart pounding as her words sank in. She wanted to explore. I could practically feel Zoe's influence in every sentence Megan spoke. In the easy, rehearsed way, she framed it like it was a gift she was offering me, instead of the betrayal it felt like. Alex, she said, her voice softening as if sensing my struggle. This could be a way to keep things fresh, to save what we have. You and I both know things have been, well, they haven't been what they used to be. She stopped, as though she wanted to say something more, something deeper, but the words hung in the air unspoken. I sat back, digesting her words, trying to keep my tone steady. So, what exactly are you asking? Permission? I said, forcing out a slight laugh, though I knew I didn't mean it. Megan's eyes flickered with something close to impatience. It's not about permission, Alex. It's about choice. I'm trying to suggest something that would give us both freedom. A freedom that might even bring us closer in the end. The word echoed in my mind, freedom. Was she really looking for freedom, or was this just a more palatable way to cover the need she couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge? Just then, her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced down quickly before catching herself and setting it face down, though not quickly enough for me to miss the preview. Zoe had texted, a short message with a heart emoji at the end. So much for keeping this between us. Does Zoe know everything about this? I asked, a quiet fury threading my words. Megan shifted slightly, her calm starting to crack. She's my friend, Alex. We talk about things. You have Nate. I have Zoe. Oh, I have Nate? I shot back, exasperated. I don't need Nate to validate my marriage or tell me how to run my life. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. I looked at her, the woman I'd shared a dozen years with, wondering how we'd become so unrecognizable to each other. It was as if a stranger had settled into her skin, slipping words into her mouth that I couldn't even fathom. But more than anything, I felt a quiet, simmering anger that this conversation, was happening in my own kitchen where everything was supposed to be safe. So, you're saying this is what you need? I said finally, more as a statement than a question. Yes. Her voice softened, her posture relaxing slightly, like she'd finally succeeded in pushing me over a cliff. But I want you to be a part of it too. I don't want to leave you behind. I looked at her, feeling the deep ache of betrayal settle in my bones, but I pushed it down, forced myself to nod. All right, I'll consider it. I managed, the words catching in my throat. It was the only thing I could say, though the very notion of it felt foreign, revolting. Without another word, she nodded back, almost relieved. She turned to finish preparing dinner, as if the conversation hadn't just detonated the comfortable rhythm of our life together. The days after Megan's proposal fell into a kind of twisted routine. Every morning, I'd leave for work in a state of guarded tension, unsure if I'd come home to find everything normal or otherwise. And, as if on cue, she began to test the waters of this so-called freedom with subtle changes that seemed innocent at first but quickly turned anything but. It started small. Megan began lingering in front of the mirror longer, experimenting with shades of lipstick she hadn't touched in years, styling her hair differently. Then she upgraded her wardrobe, leaning into dresses that clung tighter, heels that clicked a little louder on our hardwood floors. I wanted to believe it was nothing, perhaps a phase, or even a bit of overcompensation for what we discussed. But that theory evaporated the night she came home late, for the third time that week. I heard her before I saw her, the soft creak of the door, the hushed shuffling as she stepped out of her shoes, trying to be quiet but too clumsy to succeed. I was sitting in the living room, nursing a beer that had long gone warm. Late night? I asked as casually as I could manage, not taking my eyes off the television. Megan paused, clearly startled, then walked into the room with that new confidence, head high, face set as if daring me to comment. I told you I'd be out with Zoe tonight. You did, I replied, eyes still fixed on the screen. You didn't mention you'd be out till 1 a.m. She dropped her purse onto the coffee table, taking a seat across from me. I thought we agreed we wouldn't question each other about times and details. I could hear her tone wavering slightly, betraying the steadiness she was trying to portray. I let out a humorless laugh. All right, that's how this works now, isn't it? Her face stiffened, and she crossed her arms. Alex, if we're going to do this, we need to trust each other. Trust, I echoed, rolling the word around like it was foreign. She'd hijacked it, twisted it to fit this new framework where trust apparently meant looking the other way. I wanted to lash out, to ask her exactly who she was seeing, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded slowly, as though I was digesting the new rules she was so keen on enforcing. The days continued, each one punctuated by Megan's outings that seemed to grow bolder. I'd come home from work to find her carefully preparing to go out, sometimes slipping away without a word, sometimes giving a passing, "I'll be home late." Each time, she returned with that same air, as if she expected me to ask questions, to get angry, to act jealous. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. One Friday night, when the silence in the house was stretching into something unbearable, I found myself dialing Nate's number, my thumb hovering over the call button before finally pressing down. Nate was an old friend, the kind you don't have to catch up with because he always just gets it. If there was anyone who'd understand this mess, it was him. "Alex," Nate answered with his usual bluntness. "It's been a while. What's going on?" I sighed, unable to hide the weariness in my voice. "Nate, you got a minute? I need to talk about Megan. Things have gotten weird." I could practically hear him arching an eyebrow on the other end of the line. "Weird? Well, you've got my attention." We agreed to meet at the Brass Tap, a dimly lit, out-of-the-way bar where we'd spent countless nights in our younger years. When I arrived, Nate was already there, casually slouched over a beer, his expression equal parts curious and skeptical. He had always been cynical about relationships, especially marriage, and I braced myself for what he'd say. I slid into the booth across from him, ordered a whiskey, and waited as the bartender poured it. Nate watched me with a faint smirk. "So, what's this about Megan?" "Let's just say she's changed her view on marriage," I replied, my voice barely hiding the sarcasm. "She wants us to have an open relationship." Nate's eyes widened, then narrowed, a smirk spreading across his face. "Well, hell, you can't say she lacks imagination." "I don't even know how to react," I admitted, swirling the whiskey in my glass before taking a sip. "It's like she's reinvented the whole concept of trust. She goes out now, dresses up, comes back late. And the kicker? She expects me to just go along with it." He leaned back, watching me carefully. "And you're just letting it happen?" I glanced down, knowing how it must look. I don't want to stoop to her level, Nate. I don't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking I'm that desperate. He chuckled dryly. "Alex, you're sitting here, letting her walk all over you. This open marriage was her idea, right? And she expects you to just stand by, waiting around for her?" "Pretty much." I sighed, downing the rest of my drink. "And the worst part is, I feel like I can't even argue about it. The second I question her, it's like I'm the one with trust issues." Nate tilted his head, his expression shifting to something darker, more calculating. "Maybe it's time you start playing by her rules." I frowned, unsure if I'd heard him right. "Playing by her rules? What, you think I should just start seeing someone too?" "Why not?" he replied, shrugging as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "If she's so dead set on this idea, then make her feel it. Download a dating app, go on a date. Let her see what it's like." I shook my head, the idea sinking in, but still uncomfortable. "You're suggesting I just go along with it? Like nothing's wrong." "No, Alex. I'm saying don't sit around like some loyal dog while she's out there living her life. Go on, make her understand. She thinks this is what she wants? Show her exactly what it looks like." He leaned forward, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I'm telling you, Alex, she's counting on you being passive. The second she realizes you're serious, she won't be so smug." I took a long breath, the whiskey warming in my chest as I mulled it over. The thought of it going out, actively participating, felt strange, surreal. But the anger, the sense of being played, was becoming harder to ignore. "Fine," I said almost to myself. "Fine. If this is what she wants, maybe it's time she sees it up close." Nate's smirk deepened, and he lifted his glass. "Now that's more like it. Let's see how she handles this." When I got home that night, Megan was already asleep, or pretending to be. I made my way to the bedroom quietly, slipping into bed and staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. It was against everything I believed in, but Nate's words lingered. Megan's new version of trust was one-sided, and I was about to level the playing field. The next day, I downloaded a dating app, an act that felt both foreign and ridiculous, and stared at the screen. There were profiles, faces, bios filled with the familiar language of dating I'd left behind over a decade ago. I skimmed through, trying to convince myself this was a way to regain some control, but feeling a strange weight settle in my chest. Still, I set up a profile, choosing photos, writing a simple bio that felt impersonal and detached. That evening, as Megan got ready to go out yet again, she gave me a passing glance. "Are you going to be all right tonight?" I shrugged. "Actually, I thought I might head out myself." She paused, a flicker of surprise breaking through her cool exterior. "Oh, where to?" I smiled slightly, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "Just meeting someone for drinks. Thought I'd take a page from your book. Explore a little freedom." Her reaction was brief, barely a hint of disapproval, but it was there. She wasn't expecting me to play her game. "Well," she replied, her tone carefully neutral, "I suppose that's fair." I'd made my decision and, to my surprise, it felt almost liberating. The dating app had done its job. I'd met Sophia, a striking, magnetic woman with a presence that could fill a room. She was tall, with dark hair that framed her face in sharp angles, and a knowing gaze that didn't waver. There was something about her, a quiet confidence that hinted she understood more than I'd said. And that was before I'd even told her about Megan. Our first meeting was over drinks in a cozy bar near the edge of town. The place was dimly lit, a safe, neutral space where the evening crowd hummed around us, indifferent to anything unusual. As I settled into my seat across from her, she gave me a sly smile that cut through my nerves like a knife. "So," she said, leaning in, her eyes scanning me in a way that felt almost invasive. "I have to say, I don't meet many men who say they're married right out of the gate." Honesty seemed appropriate. I replied, trying to match her candor, but feeling awkward, like I was wearing someone else's skin. She raised an eyebrow, studying me for a moment. "Is it really an open relationship, or are you just testing the waters?" There was no malice in her tone, only a hint of curiosity. I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "It's new," I admitted. "My wife suggested it. I'm not exactly sure where it's leading, but here we are." She nodded, taking a sip from her glass, her expression unreadable. "I get it. Testing boundaries. It can be exhilarating." Her calm, even voice reminded me of Megan's, that strange assurance Megan had used when proposing this arrangement. But Sophia had a bluntness to her that was different, refreshing. She didn't mince words. "So, tell me, Alex," she said, her fingers tapping the edge of her glass. "What is it you're really looking for?" I hesitated, feeling that familiar flash of guilt, but her gaze didn't waver, almost as if she were daring me to answer honestly. "To be completely honest, I'm not sure," I said, and surprised myself with how true it felt to say. Maybe just a reminder of what life was like before marriage became complicated. She leaned back, studying me, her lips curling into a smile. "Well, sometimes a reminder is all we need." We stayed for another drink, talking about everything and nothing. Her work, her travels, the quirks of life in a small town. With her, there was no tension, no expectation hanging in the air, just a steady, easy flow. The more we talked, the more I felt something loosen in me, as if I were slowly shedding the weight of these past few weeks. When we finished our drinks, she leaned in with that same sly grin. "So, are you really planning to stop here?" she asked, a playful spark in her eye. "Or are you going to show me what else this night has to offer?" The question hung in the air, daring me to answer. I felt the hesitation, a stubborn remnant of who I was before Megan's proposal, but in that moment, frustration overtook it. Maybe Nate was right. Maybe I needed to play by Megan's rules. "Let's go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She didn't miss a beat, her eyes flashing with approval as she followed me out of the bar and into the night. Back at the house, there was no hesitation, no need for pretense. Sophia moved with a confidence that felt alien in my own home. She glanced around with a casual air, eyes landing on framed photos on the mantel, little souvenirs from a life Megan and I had built. But tonight, they felt like relics from a world I was momentarily detached from. "So, this is it?" she asked, stepping into the living room, her fingers trailing along the back of the couch. "Yep," I replied, trying to hide the strange feeling of seeing someone else in my space. This wasn't like inviting a friend over. It felt invasive, forbidden, but it was too late for second thoughts. She turned to me, tilting her head. "What's on your mind, Alex? Second thoughts?" I met her gaze, a simmering defiance rising in me. "No second thoughts," I said, feeling the words settle with surprising conviction. "Not tonight." That was all she needed. Without another word, she stepped closer, her fingers brushing my arm as she leaned in, and everything else faded. I let myself get lost in the moment, in her presence, in the silent rebellion against the expectations Megan had thrown on us both. And for the first time, I felt the exhilaration Megan had alluded to in her own strange way, but on my own terms. We were tangled together on the couch, caught up in each other, when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway sliced through the haze. My heart leapt into my throat, reality crashing down like a thunderbolt. Megan. I hadn't thought she'd be home so soon. Sophia noticed my sudden tension, her eyes narrowing with a curious glint. "Expecting someone?" I glanced toward the door, the light spilling from the porch illuminating Megan as she stepped out of her car, her phone in hand, her face unreadable. It was too late to stop, too late to hide. Instead of scrambling, I did something unexpected, even to myself. I held Sophia's gaze, and with a steadying breath, I decided I wouldn't flinch. Megan walked in, her keys jingling as she opened the door. Her eyes flickered from me to Sophia, and for a split second, I saw the shock ripple across her face, quickly followed by a flash of anger. Her mouth tightened, and I could see her wrestling with the urge to say something, to lash out, to react. But she didn't. She stood there, her gaze darting between us, as if trying to absorb what she was seeing. "Sophia," I said, my voice steady. "This is Megan." Sophia, to her credit, didn't miss a beat. She gave Megan a polite nod, as though they were meeting under the most normal circumstances in the world. "Nice to meet you, Megan." The tension was thick enough to cut, each second stretching painfully, unbearably. Megan's mouth opened, but no words came. She just looked at me, her face twisting in disbelief, as if I'd somehow broken the very rules she'd laid out. I held her gaze, unflinching. "This is what you wanted, right?" My voice was calm, almost mocking, and I could see it hit her like a slap. Openness, freedom, trust. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might explode, but she only gave a curt nod, her eyes cold and steely. "Fine," she muttered, barely louder than a whisper. "Phoenix." Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed up the stairs, the door slamming shut behind her. The silence left in her wake was almost tangible. Sophia looked at me, one eyebrow raised, clearly amused. "Well, that went smoothly," she remarked, a sly smile tugging at her lips. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, feeling an odd satisfaction settle over me. "Yeah, guess it did." For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of control, as if I'd taken back something that had been slipping through my fingers. But I also knew that this wasn't just a victory. It was a turning point, a step that couldn't be undone. The rules Megan had imposed had finally turned on her, and now there was no going back. As Sophia gathered her things and prepared to leave, she gave me a parting smile. "If you ever need another reminder of your freedom, you know where to find me." I nodded, feeling the full weight of what had just transpired. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." The morning after that fateful night with Sophia was tense, the house thick with an uneasy silence. I could feel Megan's anger radiating from our room even before she emerged. She avoided me the entire morning, moving through the house like a storm cloud, her expression unreadable but charged with barely contained resentment. Every clink of a cup or shuffle of footsteps seemed to reverberate with the unspoken aftermath of last night. By noon, she finally cornered me in the kitchen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't waste time with preambles. "So, is this what we're doing now?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Parading random women into the house?" I took a sip of my coffee, setting the mug down deliberately before meeting her gaze. I thought that was the whole idea. Freedom, right? Or was it only supposed to go one way? She clenched her jaw, refusing to break eye contact. "I didn't expect you to flaunt it. Bringing someone here? Alex? To our house?" Her voice wavered, and I caught the flicker of hurt that broke through her anger, a small crack in the armor she'd been holding together. "Believe me, Megan, it wasn't my first choice," I replied, my tone even. "But let's be clear, this was your idea. I'm just following the rules you laid out. Then maybe we need some new rules." She straightened, her voice hardening. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." I raised an eyebrow, holding back a smirk. "Oh, and what exactly does right look like?" She paced to the counter, fingers tapping rhythmically as if she were still figuring that out herself. "Boundaries," she declared after a pause. "Clear boundaries. No one comes to the house, for starters." "Fine," I agreed, keeping my tone light. "Then I expect the same from you." Her eyes narrowed. "Of course. And no public displays, no one we know. Keep it discreet." Her words sounded more like a carefully crafted script, and I could practically see Zoe's influence in every syllable. "And who gets to decide what's discreet?" I pressed, folding my arms. "You? Or Zoe?" She froze, a slight blush creeping up her neck, but quickly composed herself. "Zoe's been helping me through this, Alex. She has experience. She's open-minded." "Open-minded," I echoed, the sarcasm unmistakable. "Let me guess, Zoe thinks I'm the bad guy here?" "She thinks," Megan started, hesitating, "that maybe this is showing me who you really are. That if you actually respected me, you wouldn't have," she trailed off, biting her lip. "Respected you?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "This was your idea, Megan. You don't get to write the rules and then pretend I'm breaking them, because I'm not sticking to your version of how this should go." We stared at each other, the silence thick, tense. Finally, she turned on her heel. "Fine. If this is how it's going to be, then I'll do the same." Her voice was almost a whisper, laced with an edge I hadn't heard before. I watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of defiance and emptiness settle over me. If Megan was setting up a game, then fine. I'd play. But as the day wore on, I knew I needed to talk it out, if only to clear my head. And there was only one person who'd tell me exactly what he thought, without sugarcoating it. That evening, I met up with Nate again, this time at a different spot, a smaller, quieter bar where we could actually hear ourselves talk. He greeted me with a smirk, his usual bluntness tempered with a flicker of curiosity. So he started leaning back in his seat. "How did she take it?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Not well. She's already setting up new rules, trying to keep things discreet and controlled." Nate chuckled, shaking his head. "Of course she is. She wanted freedom, but only on her terms. Classic." I looked at him, feeling the frustration boil over. It's like every step I take, she pushes back. She's angry because I'm following her lead. Nate took a sip of his drink, eyes gleaming with amusement. "So, what are you going to do? Keep letting her run the show?" "No," the answer surprised even me. But as I said it, I felt a strange resolve settle over me. I'm not going to sit around waiting for her to set boundaries she doesn't follow herself. I'm done with the double standard. Nate nodded, his expression approving. "Good. Then it's time to take control, Alex. Let her know you're not just here to keep score. You're here to live your own life." The next few weeks turned into a strange, twisted back and forth between Megan and me. She became noticeably more secretive, staying out later, her excuses turning vaguer each time. I knew Zoe was involved, encouraging her, pushing her further, even going so far as to introduce her to new people at events and dinners that I wasn't invited to. One evening, as Megan was getting ready to go out, she came into the living room with an air of confidence I'd grown accustomed to seeing. She was dressed up, her hair done, a slight flush on her cheeks. She paused, watching me as if waiting for me to ask where she was headed. "Got a hot date?" I asked, not looking up from my book, keeping my tone casual. She glanced at me with a flash of irritation. "It's not like that." "Of course not." I replied dryly. It's just exploration, right? She let out a frustrated breath. Alex, if this arrangement is too much for you, maybe we should call it off. But don't act like this is a game. I set the book down, meeting her gaze. Megan, you brought this game into our lives. I'm just playing by the rules you set up. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see a mixture of anger and uncertainty flicker across her face. Fine, then you can do whatever you want, just like I can. Oh, don't worry, I said, my voice cold and steady. I intend to. As she left, a strange sense of satisfaction lingered. She wanted to push boundaries, to test limits, and I was about to show her what that meant. But this time, I wasn't alone. A few nights later, I invited Sophia out again, this time to a dinner party I knew Megan wouldn't be attending. It was an event at a mutual friend's place, a gathering we'd both been invited to but hadn't confirmed. I'd heard through the grapevine that Zoe was planning a night out for Megan, which left me free to make my own plans. Sophia met me at the restaurant, dressed elegantly, but with that same quiet confidence. She took my arm as we entered, her presence drawing more than a few glances from people who knew Megan and me as a couple. It felt strange at first, but as the evening went on, I found myself letting go of the usual restraint, enjoying the ease of being with someone who didn't bring the weight of unspoken rules and expectations. Halfway through the night, I received a text from Nate. I hear you're making quite the impression tonight. Megan's not going to like this. I showed it to Sophia, who raised an eyebrow, amused. Is that so? It would seem so, I replied, pocketing my phone. I think it's time Megan realized this goes both ways. As the night wound down, Sophia gave me a parting smile, her hand lingering on my arm. If you ever feel like switching things up again, you know where to find me. I nodded, feeling the steady hum of adrenaline as I watched her leave. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming control. The next day, Megan confronted me. She must have heard about my night out from someone, perhaps even Zoe. She stormed into the living room, her face flushed, her tone laced with barely restrained anger. So, now you're flaunting this? She accused, crossing her arms. Publicly, Alex? Funny, that's exactly what you accused me of before. I replied calmly. But last I checked, we're both free to live our lives, right? Isn't that what this is all about? She stared at me, her eyes narrowing, searching my face as though looking for some weakness. But I held her gaze, unflinching. Zoe thinks you're doing this to punish me, she said, her voice wavering slightly. That you're just being vindictive. I laughed softly, shaking my head. And what exactly does Zoe think you're doing, Megan? This arrangement was supposed to be your idea of trust, but now that it's inconvenient, it's suddenly an issue. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, she turned away, frustration radiating from her as she headed for the door. She paused, as if she wanted to say something, but then simply left, the door shutting with a sharp click. The quiet of our house was long gone, replaced by a strange, tense energy that seeped into every room. Megan and I barely spoke, our once familiar routines shattered, and I could sense her resentment simmering just beneath the surface, waiting to boil over. I'd given up on pretending there was anything left to save. The rules of this game were already laid out, and I was ready to see just how far they would stretch. I had another evening with Sophia planned, a night I'd crafted meticulously, leaving hints that even Megan couldn't miss. I wanted her to know, to feel it. If she wanted an open door, I was about to leave it wide open. It was around 6 when Sophia arrived, slipping through the front door with a casual confidence that matched the mood of the night. She wore a sleek dress, her hair falling in waves, and as she walked in, she gave me a knowing smile. "Ready for round 2?" she teased, her voice low. I smirked, taking her hand as I led her into the living room. "I thought we might take things up a notch tonight." She arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, let's just say I have a feeling we won't be alone for long." Sophia laughed softly, clearly catching on, and settled herself onto the couch, making herself comfortable. It wasn't long before we were wrapped up in each other, the rest of the world fading to the background, until the sound of Megan's car pulling into the driveway snapped us back to the present. The headlights cut through the blinds, and for a split second, Sophia and I exchanged glances, the thrill of being caught adding an edge to the moment. The door opened, and Megan's footsteps echoed in the entryway, growing louder until she stopped short, her eyes landing on us from the other side of the room. Her face flickered with shock, quickly replaced by a flash of fury as she took in the scene. Her gaze darted between me and Sophia, disbelief etched into every line of her expression. "Really, Alex?" she managed, her voice a brittle, angry whisper. I shrugged, my hand resting easily on Sophia's shoulder. "What's wrong, Megan? Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" Megan's eyes narrowed, and I could see her wrestling with words that refused to come. Her hands clenched into fists, her knuckles turning white as she fought to keep her composure. Finally, she let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "I didn't realize you'd go this far," she spat, her voice shaking. "This is what it's come to for you." I met her glare, unflinching. "I'm just playing by the rules, Megan. Or do they only apply when you're the one doing the exploring?" Sophia glanced between us, the tension crackling in the air. Megan looked ready to explode, but she merely turned on her heel, storming down the hall and up the stairs without another word. The slam of the bedroom door echoed through the house. Sophia looked at me, amused. "Well, that was intense." I shrugged, feeling an odd satisfaction. She needed to see it. Sophia leaned back, crossing her legs as she gave me an approving look. "Glad to be of service," she said with a smirk. "So, what's the plan now?" "Stay the night," I said without hesitation, my voice steady. Sophia's eyebrow arched and a sly smile crept onto her face. "Bold move, Alex. Let's just say it's time for things to be a little less subtle." The next morning, Sophia and I were up early, her presence a deliberate reminder for Megan of what had transpired. She glared at me when she finally came down, barely acknowledging Sophia, her face a mask of contained anger. As Sophia left, she gave Megan a polite nod, as though they were casual acquaintances meeting on the street. Megan said nothing, watching as Sophia slipped out the door, leaving the house in a silence that felt heavier than any argument. But the silence didn't last long. Megan rounded on me as soon as the door closed, her composure cracking, anger spilling over. "Is this some kind of twisted revenge for you?" she demanded, her voice laced with fury. "Do you honestly think humiliating me is going to fix anything?" I crossed my arms, keeping my expression calm. "I'm just giving you what you asked for. If you wanted a different outcome, maybe you should have thought this through." Her face twisted, a look of disdain in her eyes. "This isn't what I wanted, Alex. I wanted us to—" She stopped, clenching her jaw, unable to finish the thought. "To what?" I asked, pressing her. "To make this some one-sided game where you're the only one allowed to have your fun?" She looked away, struggling for control. "It's not the same," she muttered. "What you're doing, it's vindictive. You're doing this just to hurt me." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Maybe you should take a good look at what you started, Megan. You opened this door, and now you don't like the view." She let out a frustrated breath, looking like she wanted to argue, but the words seemed to escape her. Without another word, she turned and stormed out, the sound of her heels echoing as she left. That afternoon, I got a message from Nate, clearly relishing the drama that was unfolding. "Sounds like things are heating up over there. Heard you made quite the scene last night. Keep it up, man. You're giving her a taste of her own medicine." But the game had only just begun. Megan had started seeing someone, a younger man named Luke, someone Zoe had introduced her to at one of her endless social gatherings. I'd heard bits and pieces from mutual friends, whispers about how they'd been seen out at a new rooftop bar, holding hands, laughing. Apparently, she wasn't too concerned about keeping things discreet anymore. When I finally confronted her about it, Megan didn't bother denying it. She seemed almost proud, as if flaunting her newfound freedom. "Luke gets it," she said one evening, her tone defiant. "He's uncomplicated. He's not interested in drama." I raised an eyebrow, letting out a humorless laugh. "Uncomplicated? You think dating a guy barely out of college is going to be your solution?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "At least he doesn't play mind games. Unlike you." "Oh, that's rich," I shot back. Coming from the woman who decided our marriage was just a suggestion. Now that I'm following your lead, it's suddenly a problem? She glared at me, unflinching. Maybe I don't care what you do anymore, Alex. Maybe I'm finally ready to move on. Good luck with that, I replied coldly. I'm sure Luke's going to be thrilled when he realizes he's just your escape plan. The words hit their mark, and I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. But she held her ground, meeting my gaze with defiance. We're done here, she said quietly, turning and walking away. The weeks that followed were a blur of escalating games. Megan and I each lived our own lives, throwing our freedom in each other's faces at every opportunity. We'd become strangers in our own home, roommates who happened to be locked in a quiet, brutal competition of who could outdo the other. And as much as I wanted to feel victorious, the whole thing left a sour taste in my mouth. Mutual friends began to take notice, gossip spreading like wildfire. Megan's name was being whispered in circles she used to command with ease, and I could tell the attention was beginning to weigh on her. But she didn't stop, showing up with Luke at gatherings, parading him around as though she had something to prove. One evening, after another night of watching Megan flaunt her new life, I caught her just as she was heading upstairs. "Is this what you wanted, Megan?" I asked, my voice low. She stopped, turning to face me. "Excuse me? This whole spectacle," I said, gesturing between us. "The open marriage, the endless nights out, the looks from our friends." Her eyes flared, her mouth tightening. "Don't put this on me, Alex. You're the one who turned this into a contest. I think we both know who started it." She crossed her arms, staring me down, but her expression held something different this time. A hint of exhaustion, of something breaking down behind her mask. But I didn't waver. If this was the world she wanted, then I'd make sure she felt every inch of it. I woke up one morning with an unusual sense of calm. It was a clarity I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. The constant tension, the silent war with Megan, the endless nights of second-guessing, all of it had drained me to the point where I couldn't even remember what peace felt like. But this morning was different, as though I'd finally surfaced from a long, dark tunnel. I knew what I had to do. I spent the afternoon meeting with a lawyer. I had done my research, found someone reputable, someone who would handle everything with the discretion I needed. As I sat across from her in the quiet office, laying out the details of my marriage and the tangled mess it had become, a strange relief washed over me. It was like unloading a heavy weight that had been pressing on my shoulders for far too long. The decision was final. I was filing for divorce. That evening, I went home and waited for Megan. She had been out again, no doubt with Luke, though she'd stopped bothering to offer explanations. When she finally walked through the door, her face was a mask of exhaustion, tinged with that familiar, stubborn defiance. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady, holding back the surge of emotions I knew this moment would bring. She looked at me, surprised, then shrugged. "What's there to talk about, Alex? Isn't this all exactly what you wanted?" "Not quite," I replied, reaching into my bag and pulling out the thick stack of divorce papers. Her eyes widened as I set them down on the table between us, the reality sinking in. "It's time, Megan. This isn't working, and we both know it." Her face shifted, shock mingling with anger as she looked from the papers to me. "You're serious?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "After everything, you're just giving up?" "Giving up?" I echoed, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "I think that happened a long time ago. You wanted freedom, Megan, and I'm giving it to you." She stared at me, as though searching for a hint of regret, a sign of weakness. But there was none left to find. I was resolute, the decision firm in my mind, and I could tell she felt it too. "What about us?" she asked, her voice faltering. It was the first time I'd seen anything close to vulnerability in her, as though she'd finally realized the impact of what we'd done, the broken pieces scattered around us. "There is no us anymore," I replied, my tone soft but firm. "We tried, Megan, but there's no going back from this." She looked down, her hands clenching the edge of the table, as if grasping for something solid. "And what about everything we built together, Alex? Are you just throwing it away?" I took a deep breath, holding her gaze. "Everything we built is gone, Megan. It's been gone for a long time. This open marriage, the games, the spiteful nights out, it's all that's left. Silence fell between us, thick and heavy. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and for a brief moment, I thought she might fight, that she would plead, argue, try to rekindle something that had long since burned out. But she only stood there, hollow and lost, her fingers tightening around the papers. "I'll need time," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "To think about it. Take all the time you need," I said, my tone calm. "But know this, I'm moving on, with or without you." The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings with lawyers, packing up belongings, and dividing a life that no longer held meaning. I saw Megan less and less. She'd started staying out longer, sometimes even crashing at Zoe's place. I heard from mutual friends that her relationship with Luke had become rocky, his easy charm beginning to fade in the face of her escalating frustrations and doubts. It was clear that her so-called freedom was turning out to be far less liberating than she'd hoped. One evening, while sorting through boxes in the garage, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. She'd been a constant through all of this, her presence steady and undemanding. Despite the chaos that had started our connection, she'd become someone I could trust, someone who offered calm in the midst of a storm. "Dinner tomorrow night?" her message read. I hesitated, glancing around at the mess of boxes, the remnants of a life I was ready to leave behind. I typed back, "Sounds perfect." At dinner, Sophia looked radiant. There was a lightness in her eyes, an ease that I hadn't seen in Megan for a long time. We settled into our seats at a small, intimate restaurant, the kind of place I'd avoided during the rocky months of my marriage. With her, everything felt different, unburdened by expectation or resentment. "So," she said with a smile, "are you finally free?" "Almost," I replied, managing a small smile of my own. "It's just a matter of time now." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. "Well, here's to fresh starts." We clinked glasses, the sound light and clear, and for the first time, I felt a real sense of hope, a glimpse of something beyond the bitterness that had clouded my vision for so long. With Sophia, there was no pretense, no games, just the promise of something real. As the night wore on, we found ourselves talking about the future, making plans that didn't involve rules or limits, only possibilities. And as I looked across the table at her, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. But Megan's life was unraveling. Word had spread about her affairs, the open marriage arrangement, the nights out with Luke, and whoever else had captured her attention. In our tight-knit circle, whispers turned to gossip, and soon her reputation began to shift. Friends who once admired her started keeping their distance, uncomfortable with the spectacle she'd become. I heard from a friend that even Zoe had pulled away, their once close bond fraying under the weight of Megan's increasingly erratic behavior. The nights of liberation and exploration had morphed into something desperate, hollow. It was as though the freedom she'd sought was slipping through her fingers, leaving her with nothing but regret. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Megan. Her voice was quiet, almost broken, a shadow of the defiant woman who had once declared our marriage an outdated cage. "Alex," she started, hesitating. "Can we meet?" I need to talk." There was a pause as I considered her request, the memories of our life together surfacing, but they felt distant, like pages from someone else's story. "All right," I said finally. "Let's meet." We met at a small cafe, the kind we used to visit years ago. She looked different, tired, worn, as though the last few months had drained something vital from her. She stirred her coffee, her eyes downcast, the silence between us thick with the things left unsaid. "I didn't think it would end like this," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Neither did I replied, watching her carefully. "But this is where we are." She nodded, a sad smile tugging at her lips. I thought freedom was what I needed, that I'd find something better. But I was wrong." I didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. "I miss us," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I miss what we had, Alex." I sighed, the weight of everything we'd been through pressing down. "What we had is gone, Megan. We destroyed it piece by piece." She looked away, her expression crumbling, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But it was fleeting. Too much damage had been done, too many lines crossed. There was no going back. After a long silence, she nodded, her voice resigned. I understand. We parted ways without another word, the weight of finality settling between us like a wall. And as I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace, a certainty that I'd made the right choice. I was free, truly free. And this time, it wasn't a freedom based on escape or vengeance. It was the freedom to start fresh, to build something real. A few months later, Sophia and I moved in together, our lives entwining in a way that felt natural, effortless. The past felt like a distant memory, a dark chapter closed for good. And as we settled into our new life, I knew I'd found something that Megan could never understand, a quiet, steady happiness untainted by bitterness or regret. In the end, Megan was left with the fragments of the life she tried to break free from, the pieces scattered and impossible to put back together. And as I looked forward, ready to embrace whatever came next, I felt only one thing: relief.